Hello and welcome to the SPA National Conference, or SPAC 21. My name is Chris Matthews. I'm the London SPA Regional Officer, and I'll be chairing this panel on getting into and succeeding in journalism. Thanks to everyone for joining us this weekend. I'm going to introduce our panelists. We'll have a conversation around the subject, and then there'll be time for questions at the end. If you feel comfortable, you can raise your hand digitally on Zoom, and we'll unmute you to ask your question, or you can just shove it in the chat and ask it at the end. Just so everyone is aware, the panel is being recorded as well as being live streamed and will go up onto the SPA YouTube channel. Right. Faima Bakar is senior staff writer at Journal Resources after 3 years on the Metro Lifestyle Desk, where she spent her time covering daily trending articles as well as features and opinion pieces. She is passionate about uncovering inequalities, especially related to race in the UK. Sheron Boyle has been a journalist for well over 30 years, writing news and features mainly for the tabloids and magazines, although occasionally for the broadsheets. Based in Yorkshire, she specialises in crime, health, travel, and anything that comes under the human interest umbrella. She has had numerous exclusives published relating to the serial killer Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, over the years. She is also a fervent campaigner for freelancers' rights. Dominic Ponsford is the editor-in-chief of Press Gazette and media editor at New Statesman Media Group. He is also a former head of news for Global Data. And finally, Justin Webb is a Radio 4 Today presenter who has been a journalist for more than 35 years. He has also worked within the BBC as a foreign correspondent, Europe correspondent, and as chief North America correspondent. He is a former editor of LSE's The Beaver. So thank you all for coming. Welcome to you all. And I'd like to start by asking you each, what do you think, what do you wish you had known when you started out in the industry? Justin, shall we start with you?
Well, look, thanks for that. Yes, I think what I wish I'd known is that it was going to be something that was open to ambition and effort, and not as closed as those in the old days used to say that it was. In other words, there's a kind of cynicism in journalism, and I don't know if the other panelists or one or two are probably too young to have come across this, but there is still, I think, a cynicism among people who manage journalists, typically at the moment actually about the money. How does it pay for itself? Perfectly legitimate question, one we might even get to. What the future is. It's all over because of Twitter, or it's all over because of Facebook, or it's all over because nobody cares anymore, etc., etc. Actually, it's all nonsense. I think the thing that I'd wished I'd known right at the beginning is that don't listen to the older generation. Don't listen to people of my age. Give yourself a kind of sense of power and sense of freedom, actually, to do what you think you want to do, and to go as far as your abilities to tell stories, capture attention, find things out, charm people, cajole people. Go as far as those abilities will take you. Don't think that you have to wait. Don't think that you have to be constrained by the outside world and by advice, actually, like the kind of advice you're going to get from us. I wish, frankly, that I'd been a bit more ambitious, actually, when I was younger, and a bit more myself, and a bit more able just to do what I wanted to do, and not endlessly looking to my elders and betters to suggest proper ways of behavior, proper ways of doing things. Because, of course, one of the great things about journalism, this is true now more than ever, although it has been true for the last 20 or 30 years, is that it changes. What it is changes, partly because of technology and partly because of society, changes regularly. So that would be my kind of fundamental takeaway. Don't listen to advice.
Brilliant. Well, what a great start. Thanks for that. No, that was brilliant. Thank you. Faima, how about you?
I personally wish that I had consumed much more of the type of stories that I wanted to write. Because when I first started, I was keeping up with the news and what was going on generally, in sort of general terms, but I wasn't reading, because I'm a lifestyle reporter now. And I've always been interested in lifestyle. But when I first started, I wasn't reading enough lifestyle news, beyond just sort of the headlines. I wasn't, signing up for different newsletters, listening to different podcasts, and just getting a whole like spectrum of lifestyle news. And I wish because I obviously now I read all sorts of things to stay informed and to give myself ideas for future stories that I can write myself. But at the beginning, I wish I'd done more of that because it would have given me a good idea of what good writing looks like, of the kinds of stories that publications are interested, that editors are, interested in commissioning. And also, if I'd done more of that at the beginning, I think I've got a good idea of where the sort of story gaps are, what kinds of stories were being missed, and areas where stories could potentially be, developed. And I think if I'd done more of that then, and now that I'm, because I am a staff writer for Journal Resources, but I'm also freelancing on the side. And so now I just feel like I've got so much to learn. And, if I'd done a bit more homework, earlier on, maybe I'd be in a better position right now. Because one of the top things that editors say right now is, read the site, read the publication. And obviously I do that, but then I think it's very obvious when you're pitching something and you don't have a sort of historical knowledge of the site. Because, if you just read the first top 3 articles that the site has published, and then you're like, yeah, I'm a big fan of your publication, and, such as la la la, and you're just listing like 2 from this week. And it's quite obvious that you probably don't read this publication regularly. So yeah, just to wrap it all up, basically, I wish I'd consumed a lot more. As much as I do now, I wish I'd done a lot more of that back in the day.
Brilliant, thanks. Dominic, how about you?
Yeah, the advice I laid down was quite similar to Justin's actually, which was in a sense to back. I wish I'd backed myself a bit more than I did at the time, and I wish I'd realised that the competition, the people I thought I was up against, weren't as good as I thought they were, if I see what you mean. So it is quite intimidating trying to get into journalism, because you think everyone else is just amazing and they're just brilliant. They all went to Oxford and they're all just super brainy and you just never compete with them. But actually, if you can string a sentence together, if you can put an article together on time, which is written coherently, spelled correctly, that you've taken some care over. If you can find a story, then you're already above 90% of the journalists out there, because there's a lot of people aren't as good as you think they are. And then I think the other thing is I wish I'd known that you only, to break in, you really only have to knock on the door. If you want to be, the only thing to stop you, the only big qualification you need to be a journalist is to really want to be a journalist and to persevere at it. I wish I'd realised that, so I think when I started off, I might have sent 100, letters to every newspaper in the country, just like the same letter. And I just thought, and, looking back at it, goodness, what a waste of time that was. It's the same as, sending the same email to you can send the same email to 1,000 publications, couldn't you, quite quickly now? But so much more effective just to pick one place you really want to work and just phone them up and write to people personally and really tailor your application, because at the end of the day, they're just human beings, aren't they? So if you find the human being that you need to make contact with, and you make a real effort to make contact with them and impress them, you've got quite a good chance of getting in there, because really not that many people do nowadays. Like almost no one makes phone calls now. And no offense to younger people watching, but people of a sort of 20-year-olds, it's a generational thing that people don't pick up the phone. So I'm always extraordinarily impressed if someone phones me up and says, I've sent you an email and I'd really like to come and do work experience or something. And I think, crikey, they've actually phoned me up. That's amazing. I think, so that would be my my tip. Don't just send an email. Don't make it easy for people to say no. Make it hard for people to say no. Put them on the spot, because then I just think that's much more effective.
Great, thank you. And Sheron, coming to you, what do you think?
Oh, my tips really are an amalgam of the previous. I wanted to be a journalist in sixth form college. My Catholic grammar school careers advisor was a nun, Sister Ethne. And when I said, well, I'd like to be a journalist, you know, she went pale and said, no, 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 and sent me off to a Catholic college to do a degree. So it took me a while. I went the roundabout way of getting into journalism. And I went in at, I think I was about 26, 27. So what I would say is I used to read the paper. You know, you'd look at a double page feature in the paper and think, gosh, I could never imagine writing that. I didn't know about things like sub-editors. So don't be overawed. You know, it is, people want to help. So ask for help. Do your research, like's been said. What I would also say is read out of your comfort zone. So, for example, if you are at the minute a Guardian reader, read The Sun, read The Mirror. If you read Vogue, look at Take a Break and appreciate, and don't be a snob about the different types of journalism. The person who buys Take a Break, their money is as valuable as the person who buys the Times. And it's about respecting, as a journalist, whatever form you work in, it is about respecting your reader, your viewer, your listener. And two big things, and Dominic's touched on this: tenacity. Don't give up. Otherwise, you're not going to be a very good journalist. And the other thing I would say is trust your gut, trust your instincts. If you think there's a story there, make phone calls, do your research, check previous cuts or things like that. And then when you get your first byline, ring your mum. And that's that.
That's lovely, brilliant. And actually, sticking with you, Sheron, what advice would you give to student journalists? What can they do to make themselves really stand out from the crowd?
Right, well, common sense really. Get your CV sorted, write a letter. I don't think a letter would go amiss. Make sure, you know, so if you're writing for work experience at the Yorkshire Post, make sure before you get an interview that you know the area they cover, the name of the editor, look online at the stories they do, the areas they target. If you go in for work experience, try and take at least one story idea. You don't have to have it bottomed, but just try and take a story. If when you get on work experience, go smart, or even for your job, I mean, it's common sense, look smart. I mean, I bought a Burberry trench coat in the 1980s, which is probably Victorian times to you all now. And I think they'll probably, Vogue would class it as vintage. I swear to God, that is my door. It was my door knocking coat, because you'd go up a garden path. They didn't know if you were a detective, a social worker, or somebody official. So look smart. You're also going into somebody's house, maybe at a time of trauma, and it's respectful. You're not going to, I've gone into houses and I've seen other journos in jeans and I think they look scruffy. Be polite. Be polite. Sorry to bother you at this time. I mean, I've lost count of the door knocks I've done over the years. I pick and choose what I want to do now, but you go in, say if you're going to interview, try and get an interview with the mother of somebody, a daughter who's been murdered, as I have done many a time. You're going at the worst time in their life. And you have to apologise that you are doing this. Quite often they might want to pay tribute to their daughter and want people to know. So put yourself in their shoes, right? I often do a lot of my thinking in the car as I'm driving. What questions am I going to ask? What do people want to know? Do you want me to go on more about interviews, or is that enough?
No, I mean, that's fantastic. If you'd like to go on, that's fine. We'll come together just as...
I mean, I specialise in crime, real life, health. You know, quite often there's been I mean, I've covered all the massive crime cases in Yorkshire, and it's fascinating. As a journo, you should want to know what makes people tick. What made that person rob that bank, kill their wife, marry, be a bigamist or whatever. So when you do an interview, you go in softly, try and find a common link to make them feel comfortable. well, yeah, I went to that university too, or oh, my aunt just lives down the road. You know, something to make them feel at ease with you. Most people only come across the media in a, you know, ordinary people. I'm talking professional, you know, politicians, celebrities. Most people only come across the media in a time of crisis, I suppose, you know, if there's a big story. So I've done some interviews. I've not got my notebook out for an hour. I've had a cup of tea with them, we've had a chat, and then I've explained what I do, how I work, and then we go through. Now, if there's a really difficult question, and a lot of my journal friends laugh about this one, an unsolved murder, and I had to wait to the very end, and I said to the man, so did you kill your wife? And obviously he erupted, but I got an answer, a quote, and then I was like Usain Bolt leaving that house.
Brilliant, thank you. Justin, how about you? How should student journalists make themselves stand out? I think you're on mute, Justin.
Sorry, I took you too literally there. I don't live near a railway. Well, I live relatively near a railway. Look, I think one of the things, just picking up on what Sheron was saying there, you got to leave a lot of your own predilections and your own views at the door when you do this job. And when I say you've got to, of course you haven't got to, and there are plenty of journalists who don't. Quite a few of them write for The Guardian. And if you want to do that, then that's fine. But it's not really what I'd call journalism, in as much as it's not properly asking questions of not only the people you talk to, but also in a sense of yourself. So what did I once believe about this, whether it's factual or whether it's more opinion? And what do I now believe as a result of having heard the views of X, Y, or Z? And it's that kind of sense of openness, I think, is really, really important. And frankly, I think sometimes we lack. You know, you worked on concrete, and as student papers go, it seems to me to be one of the more open-minded. But when we were judging student papers a year or two ago on the Today programme, the thing, I mean, there was a lot of really excellent stuff, absolutely excellent stuff, brilliant writing. But I thought a lot of them were rather closed in the sense they were all coming from the same place. You could sort of, you knew what the articles were going to say. You knew what everyone was going to say and think about everything. And that's boring, actually. Even if it's right, which is questionable, it's boring. So I think there's got to be, among a generation who are quite used to knowing what they think and having the ability to express what they think, you've also got to be willing to leave what you think at the door and to treat journalism as a proper exercise in asking questions that then influence what you think the case is about X, Y, or Z. I think that's terribly important.
Do you think it's, you ask the questions that people really want to know? I would say journalism's a license to be nosy. You're looking through the net curtains, aren't you? Yeah.
And it's really interesting at the moment. You look at the BBC and its discussions, internal discussions at the moment about the way it needs to be. And the BBC, I think I'm right in saying at the moment, doesn't have a crime correspondent. We've got endless home affairs correspondent, but not anyone who actually specialises, as you have, Heather, in crime. And you look at an area like the one that's provided Sheron with her entire career, and the one that creates, concern and conversation and thought right around the country, and you think you need to be specializing in that. You need to be thinking about that. And sometimes I completely agree with what Sheron was saying. Sometimes there's a kind of snootiness about being interested in the things that people are interested in. And it's not a kind of, it's ludicrous to think it's a class thing. It's not, because actually, posh people are just as interested in these things. They might pretend that they're not, but it goes right across actually all social classes. It's what people talk about. The rather kind of silly way in which you say, what are they talking about down the pub, as if that's the only place that people talk. But it's what people genuinely talk about or are interested in. And those are the things that should be driving you as a journalist. And, you know, albeit you might want to specialize in other aspects of life, which is fine, but you've got to keep a kind of sense of what your audience and the broader audience, what the set of questions are that they'll be asking.
Brilliant. And Faima, how about you? When you were starting out in your career, how did you make sure that you were standing out from the rest?
Well, I was trying to be sort of active, especially on social media. I think it's quite important, especially nowadays. We're seeing, you know, how powerful social media is. I would say my advice to journalists would be to be consistent. You know, if you care about a cause, stay up to date with it. It's so important to sort of can be consistent, stay up to date with it, and, you know, to care about it offline as well, to form those human connections, to develop a lasting relationship with the communities that you want to write about. And that's what I try to do as much as possible. I obviously come from a Muslim South Asian background, so I was trying to be active in those communities and seeing what they're interested in, what they want to see more of. And I was trying to do that in a way that wasn't sort of pandering or just doing it for the clicks. I genuinely care about these communities. And I was trying to be consistent in my efforts to reflect the kinds of stories that they wanted to see. So yeah, my advice, I guess, would be to be consistent, and also be vocal about the things that you care about. So if you like to use Twitter or TikTok or whatever, speak up for the things you care about. It's also a good way to, if you're active on social media, it's a good way to build a loyal following of, you know, like-minded followers, and that way you've got, you know, you might even get the attention of potential editors that may want to work with you in the future, because they end up, you know, regarding you as a sort of authority in the issues that you have been vocal about. So yeah, that's something I would say that other journalists should do. Definitely be consistent, be vocal, be active online.
In our younger days, what you've just said, Faima, we'd call that, Justin, Dominic, myself, looking after our contacts and keeping in touch with our contacts, like you said about in the community. And I'm still in touch with people I wrote about 30 years ago, and I still write about them, be it anniversaries or new developments. So, you know, that they can be a really good source for stories. And it's not just that, they trust you as well.
Just on that, Sheron, how do you actually keep in touch with them without trying to seem like a sort of media vulture? Sorry.
Media vulture. I've got a steel hand in a velvet glove. No, I'll tell you how you do it. It's not rocket science. It's just by being a decent person and a trustworthy journalist. It's as simple as that. So I've done a story this week. It's been held over, but hopefully it should go out. And it's quite a tricky mental health story involving a woman bravely revealing about the amount of alcohol she drank, etc. And it's difficult. You know, she's got a husband, she's got 2 children. It's her life she's trusting me with to write about. For me, it's a story, but I also appreciate the importance of what she's doing. So the people I know from years ago, I play a straight bat, and I always say, and I think it's a really important lesson for the trainees, put your head on the pillow on a night with a clear conscience, and you play fair. And sometimes, I remember once I did a lottery story, and she'd won 10 million. It was in the early days of the lottery, and they rewrote, the national paper rewrote the first few pads and changed the tone of it. And she didn't talk to me after that. Now, that wasn't my fault, and I was quite upset about that. It's never happened again. So what I do is, I mean, obviously I'm much more experienced now, but when I do a story, I read their quotes to them. I make sure they're accurate. I explain how it might work with the paper and how I can look after them and protect them as a freelance, you see. But even if you're staff, it's the same thing. And then you just can keep in contact. Why not? You know, they might say, oh, come, you know, if say somebody's lost a sister, well, she'd have been 40 today. So, for example, recently I've covered the story of the killing of the footballer Jordan Sinnott. He was killed by one punch in Retford, and 3 men were jailed for it. So I was put in touch with Jordan Sinnott's fiance and mother by another journalist. They trusted me. So I went down to see that. Now, unbeknown to Jordan, he died not knowing that his fiance was pregnant. So out of that, I sat with them the afternoon. We went through the story and everything. I did one feature on the fiance, talking about how she was then, a separate feature in a magazine with the mother. And then when the baby was born, we did another feature, and we'll do others. And I'm in touch with them, and they were for national publications. But what I will do as favours to them, I'll send things to regional to help their charity and things like that. It's about helping people.
Brilliant, thank you. And moving on to a slightly different question, Dominic, I'm going to come to you with this one. Now that a quick social media post, with a quick social media post, anyone can report breaking news from anywhere in the world, why do journalists remain important?
Well, yeah, I think the reason is that you still need people who do it for a living. So I remember when sort of citizen journalism was first spoken about, like maybe 10 years ago or more, maybe, and there's a real feeling that, right, well, anyone can do it now. Anyone can set up a website. You know, why do we need professionals? But you know, if you look at any of the big scoops that have happened in recent years, it's nearly always professional journalists, or you know, it might start with like an eyewitness, but you still need a professional to go in there and stand things up. And I'd say the one thing that is true for nearly all the kind of really successful journalists I know is they do kind of work really hard. Like I think you know, writing's kind of fine, but I think like most people can learn how to write, and I think, you know, obviously spelling's good, and but you know, the thing that really makes successful journalists stand out, I find, is application. So I guess they really want to do it, and they really apply themselves, and that's kind of what like most good journalism is, and most like investigative journalism, which is the kind of real sexiest end of the business. It tends to be people just like working really hard, like doing like just going through a load of documents and reading them all and sticking them all in a spreadsheet, and like spending like, you know, quite a lot of time doing it, like you know, it's just like, I mean, a lot of investigative journalism is just sort of counting, really. It's just kind of like going through a load of spreadsheets and just counting things up, and then making a load of phone calls. So yeah, I think yeah, I think that definitely you know, more than ever, there's a good role for professional journalists. And if you look at Bellingcat, like that, the you know, that website shows that even if you get like kind of, you know, amateurs who are like incredibly good at kind of you know, finding things and sharing things on Twitter, then you can actually professionalize that if you get really good at it.
Brilliant. And on that note, I'm going to open up the conversation to everyone watching on Zoom at home. You can raise your hand digitally or put a question in the chat that we'll read out. So feel free to do that from now. In the meantime, I've got another question of my own. What's been the most difficult part of your career? Faima, I'll start with you.
I think one of the most difficult things in my reporting has been when I used to be at Metro anyway, I would write a lot of stories that were that spoke to my lived experience, but I would get a lot of sort of resistance from readers sometimes, and I would also be asked by editors to sort of like qualify everything that I'm saying with lots of research and evidence and stats and so on. The reason why that was difficult was I know what's true of my experiences and of my communities, and having to, you know, not having the freedom to be like, this is bad, racism is bad, without having to link to 1,000 million things of how, for example, racism is bad for mental health and la la la. So it's kind of felt like sometimes my authority in my lived experience wasn't taken as seriously, because I had to keep backing it up with research and studies and all of that stuff. Because a lot of the times readers will be like, well, it's not true, that's just one person's experience. That doesn't make it any less legitimate. So that's something that I really struggled with. But I think where we are now in 2021, I think the conversations on race are much more prevalent, and I think people are much more willing to listen. So thankfully we're at a much better place. But when I first started out, that was definitely a huge difficulty for me.
Thank you. And actually, just on that point, do you think our student journalists listening at home, starting out in the industry, should take extra care reporting on issues of race and equality, especially if they're not from the race that they're reporting on?
I think only if they want to, because I think what happens with journalists of color is they can get pigeonholed, because their authority is only taken when it's like they're reporting on something that affects them. So if you don't want to write about race and racism and all that stuff, don't do it. Don't feel like you have to do it because you've got that lived experience. But equally, even if you're from a community, for example, I'm not Black, but that doesn't mean I can't, advocate for Black people. So even if you're not the race that you're reporting on, you should still be advocating for it, championing, their rights, and writing stories that affect, because I don't think that the people that are affected by a certain thing should be the only ones that are advocating for themselves. I think we need to help each other. So certainly, obviously, it depends on the story. If it's like a first person type of thing, then don't insert yourself where it's not necessary. Don't censor yourself where it's not necessary. But if it's like sort of general discussions, then obviously get involved as much as you can. Do what you can in any way that you can, I would say.
Brilliant, thank you. Sheron, as our resident tabloid journalist, I'm going to come to you first on this one. Especially since Oprah's session with Meghan and Harry, we've seen quite a backlash against the tabloids and the rest of the media. Do you think it's justified, and should the media shy away from reporting certain issues?
Well, I actually thought that documentary was very irresponsible, the way it was set out. If I'd have got the exclusive interview with the Mr. and Mrs. Markle, or whatever they go by, I would have loved that. Love a great scoop, still like to see my byline and everything. I'd have done all the interview, all the claims, Archie's skin colour, royal family racist, not being a prince, etc., etc. I would have then written it up. It would have gone to the editor, and they would have said, right, go to Buckingham Palace, Prince Charles, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, the Markles, Markle family, the aides, Kate Middleton, and we would have had to give them all a right of reply. And that's the professional thing. As you've all seen the no comment at the end of newspaper features, but they should have been given that right of reply, and they weren't. And it's shabby journalism. And basically, it was an interview, but it was like a PR puff.
Dominic, has the industry changed much, do you think, in the wake of Black Lives Matter, but also the whole Meghan and Harry debacle?
I think it's changed out of all recognition in the last decade. Probably phone hacking was the big wake up call. I think pre-phone hacking, I think there was well, maybe Sheron would know better than me, but I think certainly on say the News of the World, there seemed to be a bit of a culture of like, get the story, and we're not going to ask too many questions about what corners you've cut to do it. But I think now the all the papers are very responsible. I mean, like I think the thing that upsets people about the press now most is the fact that it's opinionated. So like the Daily Mail has got a very strong world view, which a lot of people disagree with, especially on, say, Europe. But I guess that is a differentiating thing, which differentiates newspapers from broadcasters in the UK. They are very opinionated, and I think that does annoy people. But I think as regards standards and you know, and you know, playing by the rules and you know, not breaking the law, I think you know, the UK media is really, you know, I mean, they make mistakes like everyone makes mistakes. The person who never made a mistake never made anything. But you know, I would say you know, they're pretty good nowadays, and they certainly cleaned up their act a lot compared to what was going on, you know, pre what was it, pre 2007 with phone hacking on the News of the World and the Mirror titles.
Thanks. Justin, you mentioned money and how journalism should be paid for and whether news should be paid for. I was wondering if you could sort of expand a little bit on that. How do you think journalism should be paid for?
Yeah, I mean, first, let me just add to what's been said about tabloids, because I, of course, have spent my entire career at the BBC, so I know nothing about tabloid journalism, except that I really respect it. And I think anyone who just dismisses the tabloids, I'm not even sure what the tabloids mean, because there are some tabloid journalistic outlets that are frankly not amazingly good and don't often break stories, but there are others, and you mentioned the Mail, but the Sun as well, particularly in politics, actually. These are sharp people who are finding things out. And if you dismiss them or don't read them, you're really missing out. You know, and it's not, again, it's not a class thing. It's just a do you want to know stuff or not thing. So yeah, I think, you know, it's incredibly important to keep in touch with.
I think it might be a bit of class though, Justin. When you say to people, I mean, I say I write for the Sun and the Mail, you know, I do get a bit sneery comments, but I don't care. Yeah,
no, I mean, maybe, but only from idiots, really. Because I mean, you know, not to say that those newspapers are always right or often right.
Yeah.
And you know, they say things about the BBC. Some just say things about me personally that that make you cry. But they are just really well done. And when it comes to sharpness of focus and discovery of things that people don't want discovered, they are very good at it. And that, after all, is what a lot of the business is about. It's about finding out things that people don't want you to find out, and they are really good at it. And, you know, other papers also do those things, but it seems to me that just sort of dismissing the tabloids, you know, even the Daily Star, I read the Daily Star now quite assiduously at the BBC. I think I'm one of the few people at the BBC who does.
And I do too. The Daily Star splashes are absolutely
The Daily Star splashes
brilliant.
are fantastic, and their thought for the day knocks our Radio 4 thought for the day off the pedestal quite often for brevity and clarity, not to say humour as well. And that's actually another thing we haven't discussed yet. The whole business of using humour in your writing, just kind of being aware that this is not a kind of dirge where you're just spewing out information and kind of stuff and kind of harassing people, you know, why isn't this happening, or why isn't that happening, and this is a disgrace and that's a disgrace. Actually, as well, you know, and Faima will know this in her writing and in her work, when you're advocating for stuff, it's often really important to do so with a bit of a light touch, a bit of a sense of humor, teasing your enemies, as it were, just as much as kind of bludgeoning them. And all those things are really important parts of journalism. Anyway, you're asking me about the money. I work for the BBC, which in many respects is quite, well, it's both good and bad. BBC has an awful lot of money given to it every year without having to do much for it, which is the way we organize our broadcasting system. That may well end, and when it ends, I think if it ends, then obviously broadcasting is going to be quite a different business. It's still going to be funded, obviously, through advertisements. It's going to be very interesting to see how GBTV fares financially, commercially. Interesting to see that News UK, although it's invested in Times Radio, has decided not to invest in TV and made that decision a week or two ago, partly because I think it feels that linear TV just isn't a thing anymore, and it's not a place that it wants to be. So, you know, there's all sorts of churn and all sorts of stuff happening in the world of broadcasting, but there is still always obviously going to be the money to pay for it. in the wider world, you look at what's happening with HuffPost and some of the other websites, it is really, really difficult. And it's difficult to see how, in some respects, some of these organizations keep going, however brilliantly well run they are, and however much they have an audience actually really like and appreciate them. And that is obviously a difficulty. One model, I mean, this is really going back almost to the Robert Maxwell era, which is you just get a wealthy person and that person funds it. And sometimes they fund it because they want to hide all sorts of things and pursue an agenda, as the kind of great newspaper barons did in the past, and going back before Maxwell to sort of Rodmere and Beaverbrook and all the rest of it, or just actually because they kind of like the idea. It's almost a vanity thing. And there's a great website, sort of center-right website called Unheard, UNHERD, that I write for a bit. And they have been a huge success, but commercially, I mean, at the moment, it's pretty much paid for by one man who's given them the money to keep themselves going, and they don't charge at the moment for people to read it. So, you know, the extent to which that is viable in the longer term for a bigger range of opinion, because not everyone is able to get a wealthy backer, and a media that is only available through wealthy backers obviously isn't a particularly healthy media. But, you know, there are a range of ways still in which journalism can be paid for. And the interesting thing, I think, in the next sort of decade or so is to see how that changes.
Thanks. And you brushed on it briefly, and I'm going to come to Faima with it. Lots of journalists receive hate online. How do you deal with that? How do you make sure you don't just end up sort of crying on the way home, basically?
Yeah, no, you do have to have quite a thick skin when it comes to abuse. I've got my fair share of it. Last year it got really bad. I had to involve the police because my address was being shared online. So it can get really bad. I definitely have developed a thick skin, and the way to do that is, unfortunately, you have to ignore them. You have to ignore the trolls on Twitter. Where I used to get a lot of emails, and I just had to like block the sender, and just try not to read the comments, because you know you can get 1,000 good comments, but if you get that one really bad comment, it kind of sticks with you. So the kind of advice I'd give is don't read those. Sometimes I would sort of like torture myself and go through them just to see what was being said, but it never left me in a good place. So like now I try not to read those. Also on Twitter now you can you can set your settings to include comments from people that you follow only. So that way that blocks out all the trolls. So if you don't want comments from people that you don't follow, you can add that setting. You can, if you're sharing on Facebook or whatever, you can again change those settings so that only your followers can see it. So play around with your settings, see what works for you, what makes you comfortable. But yeah, just try not to read them, and don't engage with them either. If they've said something, don't start like arguing back, because you're just going to waste your time, your energy, your effort, and it's not going to go anywhere, because it's unlikely that you're going to be able to change a troll's opinion of whatever they're saying. So yeah.
Thanks. And Dominic, in your experience of reporting on newsrooms and reporting on the press, is there sort of ample support from editors and from newsrooms for journalists who receive such sort of abuse?
No. But I mean, I think like many things, it's something you've got to sort of learn on the job, really. Dealing with that sort of thing. But I would just advise people to be very, very careful, and to be very, very careful on social media, as well, because you can, there's a lot. It's a very, saying the wrong thing on social media is something that you might have thought was kind of funny at the time, but doesn't necessarily look quite so good the following day when you've not had a couple of glasses of wine. It's a really easy way to kind of end your career before it's even begun. Because
look at the Vogue, the young Vogue editor who lost the job recently because of tweets going back years when she was a teenager. And I think for all the young people, you do need to think about what you're putting out there and how it looks to prospective employers.
Yeah, I mean, there are some sort of dangerous areas, aren't there, to step in now, where you can kind of, you know, to coin a phrase, you can get cancelled, can't you, quite easily? So, and you can also get, you know, if you you know, libel someone or you know, then that's you personally, you know, paying for it. So yeah, I would just yeah, advise people to be very careful.
Brilliant. Well, I'm afraid we've reached the end of the session. It's been a fantastic hour, and thank you very much to all our panelists for sharing your experience, sharing your views, and thanks to everyone watching at home as well. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, please tweet us or on Instagram at us at SPA Journalism. Tell us how amazing it was. I thought it was brilliant, personally. I hope you'll see some of our
You
other...
take critical comments as well, Chris.
Yeah, oh yeah. Tell me how awful I was as well. I'd love that. Yeah, I'll read them into the night. But no, thank you very much. Do engage with us, and thank you to all of our panelists. And I hope we'll see you at some of our other panels, workshops, and talks this weekend. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.